So we talked a lot about mass immigration into Britain and elsewhere. And I thought we could talk a little bit about the nature of diasporas and long-term assimilation and integration. So I recently read Paul Collier's book from about 13 years ago, Exodus, and he wrote about diasporas saying that the more culturally proximate a group of people are, the closer to the host population they are, the faster the rate of integration. And then those that are more culturally distant, they will tend to remain in a diaspora, and they'll experience higher rates of sustained migration as well because they want more of them around to feel more at home. And so if we've got a mass immigration policy, which is pretty indiscriminate with regards to whether an immigrant is going to be culturally closer to us or further away, is effectively we are encouraging the growth of these large diasporas that may never integrate. And I guess that is my question to you is, in the multi-ethnic Britain that we have and the various different cultures that we have living side by side, some closer to each other than not, what prospects are there for Britain based on what you know about demographic harmony and conflict, and also for retaining a sense of itself based on its history when you're importing lots of different cultural ideas and attitudes? What does the future of Britain look like on current course?
Well, I think the Collier book's very good, and there are good reasons for people still to read it and think about it. And it's the sort of issue that's not very easily discussable, that some groups are more assimilable than others. But there's an awful lot to do with the nature of the society in which you're coming. So something I often think about is I have a friend whose mother came from a very old family of Salonican Jews. And they'd been in Salonika for 500 years, and they were still speaking Ladino, a dialect of Spanish. And another friend whose grandmother was living in Istanbul, she didn't speak Turkish. She was still speaking Ladino. She's no longer with us, but, well into the late 20th century. And I'm the son of German immigrants, and I do speak some German, but my sister doesn't speak any German at all. So it's very interesting that some societies, that's not really about distance. It's just interesting how some societies are set up for ethnic groups to remain extremely isolated, or at least linguistically and from a marriage point of view, cut off from the rest of society for centuries. And in others, they assimilate very, very quickly. I think immigrants do bring a degree of richness and variety to a country, and we don't want them to lose all their identity. But at the same time, how can you retain some of your identity and fit into the country? I think that very much depends on the narrative the country has. And if the country has the sort of narrative that Britain has at the moment, of self-abnegation, of stressing all the bad things in its own history, then what you're really telling people is they're coming to a dreadful place, and they really mustn't integrate. They must make us more like them if they possibly can. And there's really nothing to integrate into. There's no culture, there's no history, other than things we should be bitterly ashamed of. And I think that's absolutely disastrous, as well as being unpleasant and inaccurate as a reading of history. I think it's sociologically disastrous. And I don't think we will create a harmonious society unless we're able to have a narrative of national pride and success. If you think of America in the late 19th century, early 20th century, it assimilated millions and millions of people from Eastern and Southern Europe. It had traditionally been a place that people from Britain went to, and Northwest Europe more generally, Scandinavians, very largely Protestants. Then it managed to integrate Irish people, and then Irish Catholics, having had a lot of Irish Protestants earlier, and then Poles, Russians, Jews, Italians, Sicilians particularly. It managed to create a narrative of the melting pot. Now, I'm not saying we need exactly to replicate that. We obviously have a very different tradition, but it shows how successfully you can integrate very large numbers of people. And the way to do it is absolutely not saying that we have a history of shame and that is the country that people are coming to. So I think it's got a lot to do with where people are coming from and the stories they bring, but it's also very important the story that we tell ourselves and we tell them when they get here.
Well, let's think about what our governing classes, our political classes, could do better then, or to try and create that more harmonious future in a multi-ethnic society. Based on what we know about demographic implications of things like mass immigration and the cultural aspects of it, is it feasible that before all of these economic decisions were being made, that those in the political class ought to have known a little bit better about what was to come with regards to social cohesion, for example? Or was it a kind of an experiment that was run on the basis of economic models, and it had obscured these other factors, and it's only now that it's okay, maybe there are ways in which we need to try and deal with this, like the promotion of diversity, or, like you say, self-abnegation, in the hope that we might be able to raise people up to be part of us by negating ourselves. You know, what is it that our political class could be doing, and could it have foreseen what has taken place?
Well, I think in a way Britain is in a difficult position to have done that, because it has been a very homogenous society. Now, English, Scots, Irish and Welsh are obviously different ethnic groups in a way, but they lived in these islands pretty uninterrupted with very, very little inflow, much outflow, but very little inflow for so many centuries. I think we were not really prepared for it. I don't think our elites had even thought about these things, to be honest. I don't think they've been considered in the way they are in other countries. France, for example, has a tradition of integrating minorities. I'm not saying that France has done this more successfully than us in terms of more recent immigrants, but at least it's something the French think about. There is this sense of the citizen, the republic, laïcité, and so on. And that's not a model we necessarily want to follow. But I think the sheer absence of any significant immigration into this country, I mean, since the Normans, the Huguenots were really quite a small number, a few 100,000 Jews at the end of the 19th, early 20th century. Really, we've had tiny immigration. Most years since Blair, we've had in a single year more immigrants than we had from the period of the Anglo-Saxon arrival to the Second World War. So we're not really very prepared, and it's time we thought about these things. And I think probably the model has been very much driven by the Treasury and by economists, and not sufficiently by people who think about culture, ethnicity, and society.